Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again. I am here today to review another Goosebumps episode, Goosebumps Season 1, Episode 2. It Came From Beneath the Sink. This episode is based on a fantastic book. I highly recommend It Came From Beneath the Sink. Extremely underrated. One of the best books ever written. It's like a non-stop suspense thriller. You know, it's very, very real. You know, because it is something that can happen, and I would know. So the subject matter in this book is very real. And what I really loved about the book was that R.L. Stine, he took such a random idea, and it could be such a goofy idea easily. And that's, oh look, there's a sponge, and it causes bad luck, and it's a quote-unquote evil sponge. And he took that idea and he made an incredible story where there's like life or death stakes. It was that intense in the book. And when they made it for TV, I was surprised because if I were making, let's say if I was an inept filmmaker who was in charge of making a Goosebumps series in the 90s, I would say stay away from It Came From Beneath the Sink. Because even though the book is really, really good, with our type of low budget, we will most likely mess this up. And it is not worth it because you know what people are going to do? They're going to watch the episode and they're going to say, this episode sucks and the book probably sucks too. It just all sucks. It's cheesy, it's goofy, it's dumb. And then it's going to just ruin. It's almost like this episode is a gruel. Like this episode is bad luck for, the Goosebumps series. If people watch this episode, they've never seen a Goosebumps episode before, you think they're going to watch another one? No. So, this episode, unfortunately, it's exactly what the book could have been if the book sucked. And the book did not suck. It's like a B plus or an A minus. It's incredible. It's amazing, and it's really, really good. This episode is the opposite of good. But we should do the pros and cons like I promised I would do with these Goosebumps episodes. The pros would be I like the parents, kind of. I mean, they're just typical parents. The mom is the best one for reasons that don't have anything to do with the quality of the character. And I liked all the kids. I thought that it was fun seeing Catherine Isabel as a kid in this Goosebumps episode, even though she's pretty bad. And then her brother's pretty bad, and then the brother's friend is pretty bad too. It's pretty bad acting, for sure. However, I did still like them. I thought that they actually worked really well together. Whereas in The Girl Who Cried Monster, I didn't really like those actors. I thought that the main girl, the only thing the main girl and The Girl Who Cried Monster was good at was telling scary stories. She did a pretty good job with that part, but with the rest of the episode's acting, she did a terrible job. And then her brother did a terrible job, and they just did not really work well together. Whereas in this, I really do think the kids worked well together, which is surprising. Because even though they're bad, they do have good chemistry, and they're a pretty good ensemble. I mean, I could imagine watching a great version of this book with those same kids starring in it. So the episode, the thing that really bothers me is that it's such a realistic premise. And since I would know from personal experience about the premise, which you will also find out about after I post the video on this channel pretty soon, the interview that I do about it. This episode, it's such an insult to the reality of things, of getting an item with bad luck associated with it. And when you watch the episode and you watch the characters, how they react to things, it's just so bleh. It's so odd and so strange the way that, these are some terrible things happening. And these people, they're just kind of like, whatever, I'm just a kid in the 90s, whatever. And it's just really irritating, because in the book, it's treated with such respect, and it's treated with such seriousness. And even though it is serious, there are some funny things in it. The Lanx is still in it, just like it is in the episode. And I did think that was a great twist, actually. I really liked that part, and I really liked the Lanx idea. And unfortunately, I can't really give the episode any compliments that I gave the book. Like the fact that the book established the Encyclopedia of the Weird. The fact that the book had all these amazing things in it, like just such incredible ideas. The episode had none of that. The episode had jack shit. In fact, I would say the biggest, because I'm already done with the pros, if you can tell. There's no other pro to this episode except for the kids are nice. Now here's the cons. There are a couple of big cons, like Yo Mama. So the first big con is that the sponge looks terrible. It looks nothing like you'd expect. It doesn't look scary. It doesn't look frightening. The very least they could have done is make a scary ass looking sponge. Because no matter what, you would have had people who would have said, it's a sponge, sponges aren't scary. You would have people say that. But the thing is that if you also treated the things that happened around the sponge seriously, then you wouldn't really have to put much effort into the sponge. But regardless, I do think that speaking in terms of effects for this show, the effects have been pretty incredible for the show, for sure. I mean, especially even if you just watch that first episode, The Girl Who Cried Monster. I mean, come on, those are some great monster effects. Contrasted with this, where you have this stupid little dirty sponge, and they put some little glowing eyes in it. Very cheesy. Very 90s, not in a good way. And so I really think that they could have done better with the sponge. And I really don't like the fact that whoever was in charge of doing the sponge, they were like, whatever. Let's just get this over with. It's like nobody took this episode seriously. And it's irritating because it is such a serious story. And when you read it in the book even, when they talk about what happens in the book is so much scarier. Like in the book, she loses the sponge. She not only loses the dog, she loses the sponge too. The sponge runs away because the sponge doesn't give a fuck about this bitch, this random bitch who just found the sponge, so the sponge runs away, and she has to go find it, because in the Encyclopedia of the Weird, it says that if you are away from the sponge for one day, or you give away the sponge, it'll kill you, and you'll die. And so this little girl in the book, she almost died, and her brother almost died too, because the sponge was running away because it didn't care. And so they had to spend the majority of the second half of the book trying to find the fucking sponge. I mean, the gruel, because they call it a gruel. And so the fact that the episode doesn't have that, the episode is so goofy, and it's so stupid the way in the second half basically what happens is the sponge is at the school, then they have to go to the school to get the sponge, to take care of it or something, and then there's a janitor who comes into play. It's very, very different from the book, because it just felt like they did not take it seriously, and they were being lazy-ass fucks, because they really messed up this book. They did everything they could to destroy what good was in the book. I mean, it just shows how little respect they had for this book in particular, which, it's fine because, not everybody is going to get everything. Certain people, they just don't get things. They just don't, they're not going to get a story like this. They're not going to understand why it's so scary. They're not going to really get into it. But the thing is that they had a choice of what they could make. They had a choice of which books, because they did not make certain books. They were going to get to making those books, but they got canceled. But at the same time, if you're thinking about which books or stories they could have chosen, they could have chosen a much better story in terms of a story that would be easier to make. For instance, there's tons of the short stories where they would take little to no effort. I mean, there's one called The Chalk Closet, where there's a kid and he sits in a classroom while kids get sent to the chalk closet, and then he gets sent to the chalk closet, and it's like there's ghosts in there, and then he dies. And it's like, that's a very, very simple but scary and effective story that they easily could have turned into an episode. But instead, they decided to take one of the best books of the entire series, easily, and they took that book and they ruined it. And I really resent the fact that they did that. I mean, I really do love the series, but this episode is terrible. And I give this episode an F-, or even better, a fuck you, because I really don't like the fact that they destroyed this amazing book, the book that, it was so good, and it was such a good book, and, the fact that kids, especially kids, they're so easily impressionable. They're going to watch the episode, they're going to hate it. Because I watched the episode, I hated it as a kid, and I didn't want to read the book. And if I hadn't have just decided to read all the books, I never would have read the book and found out how good it was. So that's how terrible this episode is that it ruins a great book. So please like this video, comment, and tell me what you thought of this shitty-ass episode. Everyone's laughed at this episode, not just me. And then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more Goosebumps reviews. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.